Good morning. A warm and dry welcome, and to our alumni, warm welcome back to Yale, to the study, and to the Buckley Institute. My name is Kyle Vitale, and I serve as Director of Programs here at Buckley, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this morning's conversation, Too Many Administrators, Curbing DEI, and More at Yale and Beyond. Before I introduce our guests and we get started, I'd like to say a few words about the Buckley Institute. Buckley is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and free speech at Yale. We have hosted lectures, seminars, firing line debates, and an annual conference every year since 2011. Our over 800 Buckley Fellows, equivalent to 11% of the undergrad population, hold a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, Buckley has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at buckleyinstitute.com. I also want to emphasize our commitment to freedom of speech. Disruption of an event is not consistent with Yale's policies on free expression as outlined in the Woodward Report. I would ask that each of us respect the right of our speakers to be heard and the right of your fellow audience members to listen to the event. Thank you for joining us in upholding the value of free speech. Now, to business. I am excited to introduce our panelists for the morning, whom I will converse with for roughly 30 minutes. Might go a little over because we have a lot to talk about, and then we'll turn it over to your questions. These bios, I should add, are very truncated for time, but I highly encourage you to go online and read more about our esteemed guests. There is much to say about each of them. Going down the table here, Hélène Landemore is Professor of Political Science here at Yale with a specialization in political theory. Her research and teaching interests include, among other things, democratic theory, political epistemology, and the ethics and politics of artificial intelligence. She is also a fellow at the Ethics in AI Institute at the University of Oxford and an advisor to the Democratic Inputs to AI program at OpenAI. She served on the governance committee of the most recent French Citizens Convention, is currently undertaking work supported by Schmidt Futures through the AI 2050 program, and recently co-chaired the committee producing Yale's Size and Growth Report, which covered the extent of administrative positions on campus. Philip Hamburger is Maurice and Hilda Friedman Professor of Law at Columbia Law School, where he teaches and writes on wide-ranging topics, including constitutional law and its history, religious liberty, freedom of speech and the press, and administrative power. In two recent books, Is Administrative Law Unlawful and The Administrative Threat, he argues that the administrative state is unconstitutional and a threat to civil liberties. In 2014, he established the Law School Center for Law and Liberty, which studies threats to and legal protections for freedom. He is also the founder and CEO of the New Civil Liberties Alliance based in Washington, D.C., is a recipient of the Bradley Prize, and is a University of Chicago Law grad. Jay Greene is a senior research fellow in the Center for Educational Policy at the Heritage Foundation. The focus of his current research examines the effects of education on character formation and civic values. His most recent book is a co-edited volume, Religious Liberty and Education, a case study of yeshivas versus New York. Prior to Heritage, Greene was at the University of Arkansas, where he served as Distinguished Professor and Chair of the Department of Education Reform, which he founded and led for 16 years. Greene received his bachelor's degree in history from Tufts University and earned his PhD in government from Harvard University. Let's please welcome our panelists. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So I'd love to dive right in here. I have three questions to get us started that I'd like each of our panelists to take turns responding to first. So Hélène, let's start with you. Even since I wrote this intro and this paperwork a few days ago, we've had updates and developments in the U.S. presidential administration's approach to higher ed, much of which is driven by a perception of bloat in the academy. So our title begs a question, Too Many Administrators, ? It's pretty important. In the spirit of intellectual diversity here at Buckley, I'd like to start by countering that. What is the strong argument for a robust class of administrative staff on campus and at Yale? What are the dangers of curbing it? What essential operations does the public just not see that administrative support is required for? How are we expanding to meet legitimate needs, etc.? Hélène, given your role in the 2022 Size and Growth Report, I'd love to hear from you first, and then welcome our other guests to converse as well.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So I should specify that I'm French by birth, and so I have a high tolerance to bloated administration. I think we are about 60% of our GDP now is spent on government in France, which is, probably insane, compared to 40% in the US. That said, since I've been asked to defend the merits of some level of administration, and I don't know exactly where the precise threshold should be, but I do think there is value to having a robust administration in some respects. There's a necessary division of labor. We cannot all be lawyers versed in all the federal regulation that now apply to universities, so someone has to do that job. It's very time-consuming and difficult, and has implications that faculty don't really want to, face. So that alone, it would justify having a, robust administration. Then there's faculty support for logistical tasks, coordination tasks. I'm very grateful to all the, staff that supports my work, for example, as director of graduate studies. So I don't think we should complain about those tasks. Usually, performed by people who are not paid that much anyway. They're not really the problem, if you want. I'm not complaining about the janitors or the cooks or all the people who run the logistic of this huge community on a daily basis. There's also support for students. You might say, well, if the point is production of knowledge and teaching, do we need to have mental health, support as well, etc. Well, I do think we kind of do. Like, you have to adjust to the times, and that's what students now expect. So the same way that in government we went from sort of lean sort of administrations to more substantive ones, I think you also have to respond to the expectations of your community, and they're higher now. So I think there's a reason why we have all this. There's also a demand placed on universities to play somewhat of a civic role in their communities. So I think it's hard to not consider New Haven, for example, as our neighbor and invest in our community and spend some money and time, and so that's not something that faculty really want to do or can do, so there's also a role for administrators. So I guess you could say all these things are somewhat necessary. At this point, we also have a need for a political role, like somebody needs to go to Washington, sort of protect the interests of the university, so that would be, I guess, the case for all these administrators that are in place. I think it's valid up to the point that our mission is served, right? And whether it maintains our position in the rankings, the problem is that, is it what it's doing? And so I have more to say, but I should probably let others step in.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say that was an admirable attempt to defend the indefensible. And I'll just comment on one little point. I thought you admirably suggested that we need administrators to make sure we conform to law. And of course, inwardly I had a little chuckle because we both know that's the line on the other side. In fact, universities, I think in the United States, almost every single one are continually in violation of the civil rights laws in this country. It is just a permanent state of affairs. And it's not accidental, we don't know the law. It is quite intentional. And it's not intentional in the sense of let's do something bad, let's do something evil, but that those laws need to be interpreted, even twisted, evaded to secure just outcomes. And as far as I've seen within universities, if you've got a committee and there are some administrators there and some regular faculty there, the faculty will reluctantly admit, oh, maybe that's contrary to the law. Maybe we need to be careful at least. But the administrators, so far as I can tell, rarely have such caution. So yeah, the relationship between law and administration, I think, is very funny. So thank you.
So I'll expand on the cynical theme that perhaps the defense of expanded bureaucracy is to help with evasion of the law. But also, it's, I would argue, to compensate for faculty basically refusing to do their traditional job. So early when I was married, we didn't know from comparative advantage and specialization, and we did everything together. So I would fold laundry, but I did it very badly. And I did it so badly that my wife fired me from folding laundry, so I never had to do it again. And this is essentially faculty. Faculty used to advise students. They used to run the dorms. They used to teach introductory classes. They used to conduct research. And one by one, as they refuse to do those things, universities are forced to hire non-faculty staff to perform all those functions. So you have to hire advising staff. You have to hire student life and dorm staff. You have to hire research staff to do research for grants because the faculty aren't doing those. And so as the faculty are trying to figure out how not to do their jobs, the administration has to expand to compensate.
I'm going to pop in here and sort of defend the, where are we, directionally, the north side of the table here for a moment. So you all sort of alluded to faculty not wanting to do their jobs or jobs that they used to do. Having been through grad school not too long ago, I also know that increasingly, especially in the humanities at least, there isn't a lick of training about how to do anything beyond write my papers and get as many publications as I can. Did there used to be more training? Did there used to be more contextual sort of apprenticeship in running a university, or has the operation gotten so large that you are talking about just a different skill set now than maybe you used to?
I want to sort of introduce an orthogonal point, but I think it's important. It's also about faculty governance. We're not asked whether we want to do more of those jobs. It's all decided for us from the get-go once you're hired. I mean, there's no, and basically the power of faculty, the voice of faculty has been declining for 20 years, 30 years. So it's not that I think it's a very cynical take. I think we're all low-key, burned out by the amount of work we have to do. We're quantified to death. We have to score high in all these Google, Scholar metrics. We have to publish our paltry 2% raise a year are conditioned on publishing every year, which by the way is getting harder and harder because all this. The other bloated side of this is the publishing industry. It takes 5 years sometimes for a paper to go through all the RB reviews and multiple reviews. And so I don't know that I would say it's because of faculty that we're in this situation. I think, if anything, the faculty has been completely sidelined. And it's a very American development, by the way. It's part of this neoliberal sort of last 40 years of corporatization of the university and elevation of top administrators with salaries, comparing with those of CEOs. And I mean, it's just something that I don't think the faculty had much of a say in. If you could compare that to Oxford, for example, where I love the Oxford model, much more decentralized, much more power to the faculty. They have an actual parliament, it's called a congregation, 5,000 members. They're getting to decide on things like, how do we deal with COVID? Did we get asked about how we deal with COVID here? No. All the committees were staffed by administrators, very few faculty. So there's another model. That said, when I was at Oxford for a little bit, I noticed that you had to be put as a faculty on the garden committee, where you would spend time picking the flowers for the college garden. It's like, is that a good use of their time? I'm not sure, it's very time consuming. Or the cellar committee, you have to choose the wines. I mean, wonderful, but...
Excellent. I think that's an excellent assignment.
They seem to enjoy it, so yeah, it's true. But it is time consuming, so then it depends. I think it goes back to what the mission of the university is. And if it's to produce knowledge and disseminate it, maybe there's a better use of faculty time.
Although I think we're agreeing that universities were traditionally more communal. Basically, faculty ran it collectively, and they took turns in administration, so there wasn't this professional administrative class. But some of that breakdown, I think some of it could be the scale of the operation and modern pressures made it impossible to continue running as a commune. But some of it is that the faculty stopped wanting to do their bit, right? Because inevitably, if you're going to run it as a commune, then yes, someone has to live in the dorms. And yes, someone has to agree to be a dean for 5 years and give up on doing their research during that time. And as the faculty became reluctant to play their part in as communes often break down. People don't want to, clean the latrines, and so they hire people to do that, and the commune falls apart.
It seems, yeah, I think some of this is just the result of scale and modernization, as sociologists would say, and that's a pity. Part of it, though, I think has to do with the growth of federal funding. Bureaucracies like to talk to other bureaucracies, and so once you get this massive increase in federal funding, I think inevitably we scaled up administration within the university. And personally, I think that's a disaster. It's a disaster for science, not only to be defunded, but also to be funded by the federal government. They're very highly distorting effects, but we can talk about that later.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. Philip, you actually segued nice into a second point here. Certainly a lot of these criticisms in this conversation echoes writ large the administrative state itself in the U.S., the sort of fourth arm, if you will. That being one of your specialties, and so much recent attention on the administrative state with the Chevron case, do you see parallels and connections between the growth of the administrative state in the U.S. federal government, higher ed? What does it say about our historical moment? Are the solutions the same? Sort of unpack that for us.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we have bureaucratic control at the federal level, the state level, the local level, but not only in government, but also within the universities. And this is this has an uncomfortable, uneasy relationship to our ideals, which are those of self-government. We're founded as a nation on ideals of self-government. And in universities, as you were alluding to, we have ideals of faculty government. Those are much eroded. It's something just used as an excuse not to decide something at a trustee level, but it's rarely actually lived up to as an ideal in American universities. And that's a little worrisome, that disjuncture between the realities and the ideals. Now, why do we have this? I'm told, I don't believe it, but I'm told that we have a federal administrative state because of their expertise. There's a great risk that expertise is old-fashioned science. It's a science that was learned 2 decades ago. And so that's a terrible foundation for regulation. But I'm not sure that explains bureaucratic control of universities, because what expertise do our administrators have? Their expertise is in control or manipulation or self-aggrandizement. The great university administrator is someone who dexterously gets things done without one fully being able to observe what happened. And they're very skillful at this sometimes. So what explains it all? Maybe it's just the natural lust for domination. We all like to dominate something. Now, some of us, I think more virtuously, but maybe that's just my vanity, think I want to dominate in the field of ideas, find the greater truth, a better truth. And is that more innocent? I'm not sure, but there is something I think much more visceral about actually seeking power over people, physical power. Now, there's no criminal law within the universities, but there's something awfully like it. There are all sorts of disciplinary mechanisms. If I could take one more second.
Please.
I'd like to talk about a guy called Robert Michaels. You've probably never heard of him. He was a German-Italian sociologist. He also happened to be a fascist. He was a Mussolini fanboy. But he abandoned Mussolini when the love was unrequited. But he was an interesting sociologist, and he wrote about the inevitability of bureaucratic control. And he called it his iron law of bureaucracy. And he stated succinctly it was, bureaucracy happens. In the same way that excrement happens, we say excrement happens, he said bureaucracy happens. In other words, it's just inevitable. It's just there. It's not something, it's not a should, it just is. But is it inevitable? Excrement is inevitable, but we have ways of dealing with it. We have little plastic bags, we can hose it down off the pavement. Is there something we can do about bureaucracy? We need to have excrement to clear things out. We need to have bureaucracy, but we can deal with it. I'd like to suggest just one little cure. Imagine that the federal government distributed federally backed student loans and other federal support in amounts inversely related to the ratio of administrators to faculty. Now that, What would that do? It wouldn't get rid of administrators, because we actually do need administrators, don't we? And frankly, I resent when I'm given administrative tasks. That's not what I became an academic to do. So we really do need them, but we also need some calculation. Are they really necessary? And if you have to choose between money and an administrator, it would concentrate the mind. So just a little suggestion.
Follow-up for Hélène. So we have this model down in Texas of UATX, University of Austin, trying to do something a bit different, keep the mission focused on learning, and there's been language there about not growing to be bureaucratic the way that other universities have. What would I'm not asking you to provide legal advice to UATX and public here, but in your mind, if a university is given a fresh start like that, how do they balance necessary administrative roles without, if we're going to accept the narrative that bureaucracy happens, without letting that happen? Or is UATX in trouble eventually?
Well, you could follow the recommendation that came out of our report, the Senate report from 2022, that was never officially endorsed, I should say, but it's been leaked and circulated anyway. Not by me, I should say also. That we said, look, we actually don't know if there are too many administrators. That's why, I encouraged you to add a question mark.
She is the question mark.
We don't know. They don't want to share the information. So we were reduced to triangulating from public sources, from the Chronicle of Education on studies on this that said that Yale was like the second or maybe even the first Ivy League in terms of ratio of administrators to students. I mean, so we tried. We poured over the list of titles that kept changing, and we figured out, that's what we figured out, that the top administrators increased by 150% over 20 years, compared to an increase in 10% of the faculty numbers. Their salaries went up by 8%, whereas our salaries went up by somewhere between 2 and 4%. And maybe there's a good reason for it. It's just we don't know. We just don't know. So what we were asking is, give us the information, and give us a rationale. Like, it's a basic respect for the faculty. And in fact, the principle of democratic governance that I think should be reintroduced in universities, and that people expect at this point, I think. So the recommendation that came out were, well, you need to create an oversight committee staffed by faculty that would have access to all the data. And, we have economists, we have statisticians, we have all kinds of really good people, philosophers also. I mean, you could have all the brain power to say, look, actually, maybe we have just the right amount of administrators and for the right reasons. But as long as they don't share and there's no transparency and no accountability, I don't think we can be sure. And in fact, I think their silence and opacity feeds a sort of like slightly conspirational sort of view that, it's all about, lust for power, right? I actually think it's more benign than this. It doesn't mean the outcome is different, but I just think it's inertia. And I'm not sure they even know how many of them there are, The number of vice presidents went from something like 5 to 35, and did anyone really plan this? I think it's a sort of unplanned phenomenon that no one kept in check because they themselves might not have the data. I don't know. We don't know. That's basically the thing. So reintroducing faculty governance, having a budget that faculty has access to and control over, because we're reduced to like begging for basic stuff like inviting speakers, and I mean it's getting a little ridiculous, And then on top of that, there's like, I as a director of graduate studies, I don't deal with the dean for student affairs. I deal with the assistant to the assistant dean to the dean. I mean, 3 layers versus 1, is that normal? Sure. So anyway, that's the view. I think it's all about, to me, faculty governance and re-empowering faculty. So maybe that means they need to take on more of a administrative duty and responsibility again, which I think not all of us are against it,
I must say, I'm slightly involved, very marginally, with the University of Austin. And to some degree, they solve the problem, as is obvious from what I just said, by soliciting assistance from professors at other institutions to help with certain administrative tasks that are best distributed. That is not a replicable model, because if all universities did this, we'd all be doing administrative tasks for another university. It doesn't make sense. Now, I must say, I obviously was being a little facetious, but I think there was a half-truth to the desire for domination, just as I think there's a half-truth to the desire to improve the world. I think all administrators are actually perfectly sincere. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. They're entirely sincere in trying to help. But a bureaucrat will see the best solution to a problem as a bureaucratic solution, just as a man with a hammer will see, or a dentist with a drill, oh, the drill is a pretty good tool, and it may be there are other ways of doing this. Can I mention just one other thing connected to this? Because
Sure.
There's been a change. I mean, some of this is so much out of our control. If you think about what Yale was like in 1900, let alone 1850, I grew up in this town, so I have some sense of the history. There was not a very great social divide between faculty, administrators, and trustees, and donors. They're all from the same families. Or if not from the same families, their families knew each other. And so much was accomplished not through formal mechanisms. And now that simply is not the case. That's by virtue of social stratification and sheer size, right? I mean, and this gets back to something you mentioned earlier about what we teach and don't teach. I'd like to see a class, I'm never going to teach it, but in my mind, I would be teaching a class on prudence, rhetoric, and etiquette. In the old days, there was a class on rhetoric. All universities have demolished that class, except one or two universities. But there was never a class in etiquette and never a class in prudence. Where did that come from? Well, that was taught by the preachers in the churches down there. That was, the ideals were measured ideals and measured in terms of prudence and a host of other practical values. And now, being intellectuals segregated from the rest of society in our little bubbles, we pursue ideals that are not compatible, actually, with real life, whether political life or everyday civility. And so our ideas are part of the problem, too.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me part of this we can't escape, unfortunately. Please.
One thing I wanted to say is also that I think the question of the size of the administration and all of that is also connected in a very deep way to the definition of the mission of the university. And that has evolved over the years. I think, initially it was Lux and Veritas for Yale, and I think in the 70s it was sort of narrowly defined as the production of knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge. In the last 20 years, it's been redefined as follows. Yale is committed to improving the world today and for future generations through outstanding research and scholarship, education, preservation, and practice. So notice how the core mission, really, the production of research and scholarship, has been instrumentalized to another goal, which is improving the world. So now we're Miss World, trying to make the world a better place. And because you sort of make research and production of knowledge an instrument, you can kind of forget about it. So if there's a direct way to improve the world, then maybe you should do that. And I think it's very dangerous because then it leads to an inflated sense of like the role at the university in presidents and vice presidents, because now they think they have to pronounce on every political event and make a stand for, climate change or anything really. When in fact, if you recenter on the core mission, I think the hope is that if we fulfill our core mission well, as a byproduct of that, we will make the world a better place. But we don't hope to do that directly. That's not our mission.
Right.
I think that's fascinating that you raised this. It's extraordinary. It shows a profound lack of confidence in the value of truth. Because if you think truth improves the world, you just pursue truth because that's a specialized skill, as you say. I think you're absolutely right. When you say no, improving the world is the mission, it means we actually don't believe that the pursuit of truth matters as much, does it?
I'll jump in here. I want to toss it to Jay because this is a great segue to a third question about mission and about ideology and what we're doing on campus. Obviously, the argument against administrative bloat carries with it that it's not just more people, but what those people are doing. And one of the big hot words recently has been DEI. Jay, you've been doing a lot of research on this over at Heritage. I'd love you to lead on this one. What is your research showing you about the role of DEI on campus, the role of administrative DEI staffers on campus? How much weight do you put on administrators versus faculty or student peers for the liberalism we're seeing on campus? What are you seeing? Help us connect some dots there.
Sure. So, yeah, I wrote a series of 3 reports at Heritage, Diversity University, Equity Elementary, and Inclusion Delusion, DEI, in order. It was a thing of beauty. And in Diversity University, we basically just counted how many of these people there are at 60 universities that were in a Power 5 athletic conference, because those are the things that actually matter. So we weren't looking at Ivy League universities. We were looking at SEC and ACC universities. And what we found is that at some universities it was huge. University of Michigan, it was pushing 200 DEI bureaucrats. And the average was somewhere around, I can't remember the exact number, it's a couple of years ago, but it was 40 something, I think. So these are people whose sole job it is to advance a particular worldview. They're not there, we did not count people involved in compliance with civil rights law. Those people we did not count. We counted only, and usually at universities they're bureaucratically separated. There's a separate unit for compliance with civil rights law than there is for the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the advancement of a particular view of the world. And so the reason why this is pernicious is that it provides an address for the radicals on campus, extreme people who are highly ideologically motivated on campus. It provides them with an address of a place to go to shake down enemies. So that's the purpose of this bureaucracy. It's to menace faculty or students who don't conform to that worldview. And so if you are an activist student or an activist faculty member and some other student or faculty member is not in alignment, then you have a place you can go to complain and bring hassle on that person who's not in alignment. And now this bureaucracy keeps growing. The DEI bureaucracy grows, and the reason why it grows is that not because senior administrators are ideologically motivated. For the most part, they aren't. But they are menaced by activist minority students and faculty, and the way to fend them off is to throw DEI bureaucrats at them, which they want, because then that gives them more jobs for their people in the campus, but also gives them, again, a stronger address to go to menace other students and faculty. But it just buys temporary peace for senior administrators. And so that's how there's this vicious cycle of some incident, real or imaginary, occurs on campus. An organized group of students or faculty who are not representative of the entirety come to senior administrators, say you got to do something, or we're going to jeopardize your career. And the senior administrators are, what do you want? We want to expand. It's not enough that we have a multicultural center. We don't have one specifically for Hispanics. We don't have one particularly for Asians. And then they say, okay, well, then we'll create another one. We have it at the university level, but we don't have it in our college. So it expands down into the colleges. We don't have it in our departments. Then you have to recreate this bureaucracy within the department system too. And so the senior administrators throw the DEI bureaucrats at them to satisfy the complaining organized students and faculty, to fend them off so that they can try to move forward with advancement in their career. But it only lasts temporarily, because then they come back and shake them down again. So all of this is made possible, by the way, and just one other underlying theme that I think we've touched on briefly with your idea of conditioning funding on certain bureaucratic ratios. But it's not just a lack of that regulation. It's the existence of too much money. I mean, the truth is higher education is just grossly overfunded. And none of these problems, you can't afford to solve all of your problems by hiring more bureaucrats unless you have that money. And it's because they have so much money sloshing around that they can keep hiring people to try to solve the momentary problem that they're facing. And so if you want to control bureaucracy, start starving the beast. You have to start cutting the amount of resources available to higher education. Nothing sharpens the mind. Nothing improves efficiency in organizations like scarcity. Now I know we'll squeal and say, but what about pursuit of truth? We need money for truth. And it is true that we do. But truth is not as expensive as you might think.
Wait a minute. As somebody who produces truth, I hope, I think it should be very expensive.
I know. I understand self-interest too. But I mean, it's just the way we've gotten here, the core fuel for this problem is too much money. And so I know some of you are here for your reunions and so on, and you probably are feeling like you should write a large check. And, you know, I know it's not probably what you want to hear, but I would encourage you, think of something else to give to. Higher education. Yes, there are many other organizations that advance your goals, and that. And I also know you have an emotional connection. Like, your university is a fountain of youth. When you feel like you're 20 when you're here, or you know, you kind of notice you're not, but you can remember being 20. And so giving to your university is purchasing a fountain of youth, and they exploit that to have too much money, and it's mostly from taxpayers. It's mostly not from voluntary donors like you. It's mostly from involuntary contributors like plumbers who have to pay taxes for this, and they don't understand why. But there's just too much money.
Can I come in on this?
Sure.
Because earlier we were talking about the Oxford model, and I know you alluded to it. And the Oxford model, and you probably know it better than I do, is different than ours. Rather than division by department, there's a division amongst colleges, and that's a sort of natural bulwark against the politicization of inquiry. It's not that PC thought isn't there, but it's just a little calmer, and part of that has to do with British society. I confess I grew up there partly, so I'm a little familiar with it. And that means the graduate, you know, if you get a graduate degree at Oxford, there are far fewer ideological constraints on you, and you also can choose an advisor. It's much more decentralized and flexible. And this gets to the giving problem. I just want to mention the Pharos Foundation, which is now, I think, one of the leading funders of graduate degrees at Oxford. It's going to be equivalent eventually to the Rhodes. And you know, if you want to help Yale, but you don't want to give to the beast, one way of doing that is to give to something like the Pharos Foundation, because what you can do is you can say, I'd like to give money for a graduate study in Oxford for a Yale graduate. And they select very sensible, thoughtful kids. They get a less ideological graduate degree in Oxford, and then they can come back with an Oxford degree and teach in America. So it feeds into our system, elevating the nature of the conversation. So the Pharos Foundation is something worth considering here, because it can be directed to help Yaleys, but without being under the control that would waste your money. Please.
I just want to say something from the perspective of someone who actually was sympathetic to DEI for a long time. So how can you be against diversity, equity, and inclusion? These are beautiful values, right? And I think that some of these programs for a while actually did some good. I think it's, you know, the campus and the faculty body is more diverse and covers topics that I think were not on the radar of anyone in the 60s. So as a woman, I have to say, I think I have a career that I wouldn't have had 40 years ago. I mean, it's just a fact. So I think these things were well-intentioned. The problem is that, again, it's partly due to the governance structure. Once you empower bureaucrats to capture these programs, they turn them into dead thoughts, dead dogmas, you know? Like John Stuart Mill would say, any belief that's not constantly challenged, repackaged, rethought, amended, etc., becomes dead dogma, and that's what happened. And that's not good, because now the sort of position is that, well, we should never have done this in the first place, and there's no gain. I don't think that's true. I think maybe the pendulum went too far one way, and now we're in a moment of backlash, and it's deserved. But I do think there was value added by diversifying the faculty body.
Just to be clear, though, I think the advancement occurred by anti-discrimination efforts, and so and those are at universities organizationally separated from DEI. So the DEI bureaucrats are not the people who ensure compliance with Title VI and Title IX. And Title VI and Title IX are the things that helped us get diverse faculty and student bodies. And Title IX is what helped you have a career that you might not have had 4 decades ago. And so anti-discrimination is completely different from the positive promotion of a particular worldview. And the real danger is actually in the middle term, is inequity, which is really inconsistent with kind of traditional American thought for what we're trying to do, because it suggests some sort of equal outcome. So it's not equality, it's equity, and on purpose. And so the DEI bureaucracy hijacked the laudable civil rights movement and turned it into kind of a watered-down Marxist promotion of a worldview that thinks that we can be divided into oppressor and oppressed based on our group identity. That's how we know. How do we know which is an oppressor group, which is an oppressed group? It's because the oppressors are overrepresented and the oppressed are underrepresented. And this is a whole kind of watered-down Marxist worldview that has gained purchase in higher education through DEI bureaucracies. None of that flows naturally from the civil rights movement or from Title VI and Title IX.
One more thing, I wasn't sure whether I should share that, but after all, I think it's worth talking about. So I was on this, I was co-chairing this committee on administrative growth in 2001, 2022. And to my surprise and dismay, that report, though we thought we did the best we could, and the committee voted, with a majority on it, was not approved by the Senate, was not voted on, and they tabled it, and they passed the baby to another committee the year after. And that committee, I was on it again, and we completely failed to produce anything. We went to 5 pages of complete nonsense and very weak content, so we ended up not voting against publishing it too, and I left the Senate at that point. I didn't even show up to the meetings after that. I was so disheartened. And looking back, I now know what happened. We had on our committee initially, the early one, someone who was very much opposed to questioning the rise of administrative growth because of DEI reasons. Because he thought they had done so much good, and he thought that this would be instrumentalized as an attack on DEI programs, which I didn't realize at the time. I was very unaware of. I mean, I didn't quite get it, and he was not overt about it. Then he sabotaged he came out against our report, although he was on a committee, during the plenary in the Senate. And then he was appointed chair of the next committee. So of course this came to nothing. This came to nothing because there was no will. And I'm also somewhat disappointed in the Senate for the lack of courage. So that's another example of when a commitment to a belief trumps the search for truth.
What you say about courage, I think, is very important. It is the cardinal virtue that is missing so much in our society. It's not just in universities, throughout the society. And the courage to tell the truth, it's not like my parents' generation who had to land on beaches, running up a beach, being shot at. You just have to tell the truth. The worst that will happen to you is your colleagues will disapprove, but that's apparently mortifying. And the ability to stand up and tell the truth, and I think you should be lauded for doing that in your report, is actually all we need. We just need a few more people to do it. And to the extent one can encourage truth-telling, I think that will be a large part of the cure. And I just want to mention something we've been doing at Columbia, it's not an act of courage, but to support people. I had some money for litigation. I wasn't allowed to use litigation at the university. So what did I do? I started paying for dinners. Once a month, sometimes every 2 weeks, we'd have dinners from across the university. And it was the first time this had been done. It created horizontal connectedness amongst people who were interested in academic freedom, free speech. And over the course of the year, we got to know each other. Hundreds of faculty get involved. I got to meet all sorts of wonderful scientists. And then more and more of them have a little bit of courage because they know they have good company. They're not alone. Some were astonished to find people in their department, even their friends, would come to these dinners. It wasn't a political act. We go across the political spectrum quite ostentatiously. It's very ecumenical. But to the extent one can create horizontal connectedness, it's a good way of resisting vertical power and giving people some strength.
Yep. Yeah, it's it's incredible when you look at the self-censorship data for students across the country. The numbers increasingly show almost 2 or 3 to 1 against other fears. They're afraid of each other.
Yeah.
They're afraid of one another. But Heterodox Academy had some interesting data on this, and Buckley Institute does as well. The percentage of students who are afraid of criticism from their peers is hovering around 51, 52% nationally. But the percentage of students who wish that their peers would ask them questions about their beliefs is like 86 or 87%. So there's almost this sort of perception of something that almost isn't there, but there's a human instinct and a human fear of criticism, fear, right?
I would separate that problem from the rise of administrative growth.
Sure, absolutely. No, this
because
is, yeah.
at Oxford, again, they have a very different model, much less sort of hovering of administrators and all of that. They also are suffering from a free speech problem,
Sure.
and like students are known to secretly record each other and denounce each other. I mean, it's just, so I think it's almost a generational problem at this
Yeah.
point. Like, it's
Yeah.
something transversal to the question of administrative growth. Maybe administrative growth doesn't make it better,
Right.
but it seems to me.
And in this connection, I think one of the things we can teach is to teach kids how to tell the truth, even disturbing truths, in a moderate, thoughtful way that is not threatening, because that's a key life skill, right? And we, instead, as academics, we like to say things sharply because that gets us attention, and that's a mistake, perhaps.
DEI bureaucracy growth is part, though, of this self-censoring, because it makes a larger and more powerful address that people could go to report their wrong-thinking colleagues. And people are aware of this, and there are a variety of subtle punishments that these bureaucracies can hand out, including re-education camps. Well, not camps, training sessions. Right, and you could say it's all words, and it is kind of all words, but it does lead to real other kinds of consequences for people. So faculty do lose jobs. And we can point to lots of examples of this, and careers can be ended. And the other thing, in general about being a faculty member is, sure, tenure, the joke is tenure is the right to starve. So you could have the job, but everything you want requires permission. You want to travel somewhere, you need permission. You want to, bring in a speaker, you need permission. Everything you want to do requires permission, and the way you could be punished is just not be given permission for things.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on and on. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience, probably 1 or 2. So Isabel has a microphone, and she will circulate.
Well, there's been a terrific discussion, and we could probably spend the rest of the day talking about these topics. But I want to hone in on one thing. Besides the growth of this bureaucracy coming from universal seeking for money and power, of which there are lots of opportunities, both macro and micro, in the university system, one theme that has come across is, well, why can't people just be satisfied with pursuing the truth or speaking the truth? And I think part of the problem with this is that at the moment, we're in a moment where there is not a belief in a universal truth, and there is not agreement on what that truth is, and part of this comes from empowering people who have radically different ideas of what the truth is in conflict with each other to try and force their version of truth down everybody else's throats. So, and in the context of a university who's defined their mission as, let's make the world a better place, that gives the opening to do that. So my question is, what can be done to try and pull back in an idea that says at least we ought to try to reach consensus around what what truth is enough to pursue common goals instead of just trying to ram your version down and treat everybody who disagrees as evil and the enemy.
Oddly enough, politicization helps on that. Anyone who makes a politicized comment tends to be quite confident that they are speaking a truth, and it is the truth, and you should accept it. So I think relativism dissipates rapidly the more politicized one gets. I don't think that politicization should be so common, but I do think as we get more politicized, the relativism will dissipate.
Professor, I have a question for Professor Hamburger. So you stated that the universities are in violation of civil rights laws, so that surprised me. How are they in violation of civil rights laws, and how would you fix that?
Okay, so I don't want to make any accusation against any particular university. I think that would be invidious without going into a lot more detail. But how should I put it? We have civil rights laws that, at least as interpreted by the Supreme Court, whether correctly or incorrectly, but the Supreme Court is the primary interpreter, the highest interpreter in our country, that are interpreted as barring discrimination on the basis of, and then there's a long, long list. It starts with race, goes on to sex, and we can go on for half a day going on the list, and it probably should be a long list. That's okay. But the schools are engaged in what they call diversifying. Now, diversifying can mean different things to different people, and of course, it's very good that there are opportunities for people of all backgrounds to participate. That's immensely valuable. But sometimes these ambitions are interpreted in very narrow ways that are designed to lift up some groups and depress others. Just to give you a sense of it, I don't want to mention any particular school here, given what I'm about to say, but I know of an instance in which a committee in pursuit of noble ideals was not hiring people on the basis of age or of race or sex, but firing people explicitly on these grounds. That is not affirmative action, that's negative discrimination. So when you get to that stage, even I think the person most committed to affirmative action, even in its strongest sense, needs to sit back and say, no, we shouldn't be firing people on the basis of their identity. That's shocking, right? Now that's an extreme example, but watered down versions of that are everywhere. And I just hate to say it, every university is trying to manipulate what their population looks like. And that just is not compatible with at least current interpretations of civil rights laws.
And, Chris Rufo, John Saylor, if you look at the documents that they've been collecting from universities, they're finding numerous examples of explicit statements in internal documents for specific racial or sex targets for hiring, either for specific hiring or in general aggregate hiring. And I can also tell you, my experiences as 16 years as a department head and all the colleagues I knew from other universities, this is pervasive. It was just in the water. Everyone understood it. It's shocking that some universities actually wrote it down as much as they did, but it was understood even if it wasn't written down that, I knew I had to make a certain hire, that I knew I just couldn't hire. I was told, this is what you need to hire because your department needs to look like something, okay? And then you get into all sorts of trouble, look like what? Look like the world? I mean, we're grossly underrepresented in ethnic Chinese. Not nearly enough Indians. So I don't know who we're supposed to look like exactly. And I also don't know how, I had a faculty of 6 or 7, depending on the time. How am I supposed to represent every group with my 6? I don't understand. This was really difficult, and I'm opposed to all this stuff, and I went along with it. Everyone does, because it's just part of what you had to do.
Can I just throw in one more thing, and forgive me for taking up time here because it's very important. I'm quite open to discussion as to what the civil rights laws should require, and maybe the current interpretation is wrong. I think that's a perfectly reasonable position. But when the Supreme Court says one thing and we have massive resistance from universities, that is a problem. And it also creates, as you suggested, a large amount of dissimulation. You can't imagine how much dissimulation is involved in this. And that in turn creates liability. Just to make this concrete. Universities commit to the federal government very formally that they are in compliance with Title VI and Title IX. If they are not, they're liable to losing all federal money. So at Columbia, that's $500 million. I'm sure it's more at Yale. You just need one relator making a False Claims Act, and they'll get 33% of the take, you see. There's a lot of motivation there, and that brings down all funding for universities. So the problem isn't the federal government. The real problem is going to be there are going to be these suits. It's terrifying, I think, for universities.
And access to subsidized student loans as well. I mean, private universities get, almost a quarter of their revenue, directly or indirectly, from the federal government. All of that goes away if they're found to be in violation of civil rights law.
Yeah. So it's not Trump. It is a problem that's inherent in our system.
Hi, I'm probably one of the rare people in the room who is both an administrator and a faculty member, so I think I have some unique perspective here. Hélène, you brought up the statistic of 150% increase in administrative staff. I think you have to also acknowledge two different variables that may have led to that increase, one of which was just a significant increase in the total enrollments since 1960 here at the university. It's almost doubled. In addition, we're dealing with a level of complexity with understanding technology, understanding government, understanding internationalism that is profoundly different than it was previously. So I just want to say that. I guess I'm curious, because your perspective on the administrative state, I will say, I do believe there should be a little bit of a shaving of what is going on, but I think that what people are advocating for right now is a wholesale removal. And I'm curious if any of you on the panel have spent time as a full-time administrator. And if you haven't, why haven't you taken a sabbatical and taken a year and actually gone and worked as a vice president in the university to better understand what is going on a daily basis? What do you think the administrators that you're advocating to have their positions removed are doing on a daily basis?
So first of all, as I thought I made clear, I think mostly I would like to know more. That's precisely the point. The point of this report was not to necessarily be inflammatory and denounce administrators, to say, look, we just want to know what you are doing, how many of you there are, and why you're doing what you're doing, because frankly, from the outside, we have no clue, and it's not, and when we asked, we were turned down over and over again. So I don't think the onus is on us to figure it out if we're not given the data, I think that's where I would question the sincerity on the other side, is what are they hiding, basically, right? And it's not that simple. I cannot just say, hey, I want to be vice president. I mean, these positions are, first of all, now my chances are probably way lower, I'll tell you that. I think that one of the reasons that many of my colleagues on the Senate didn't want the report to come out is because these people are ambitious. Some of them want to become administrators someday. They don't want to alienate Tamar Gendler at the time or whoever is, so obviously that there's a conflict of interest here as well. No, so I don't want to demonize people. I think, as you said, I could be in that position tomorrow. I'm a director of graduate studies right now, and I can see how indeed it's much easier to criticize than to get things right. Totally with you on this, but my work is about, democracy and accountability and transparency, and I see none of that in the current system. That's what I want. I want transparency. I want an account. I want a justification for this growth. And maybe you're right. Maybe the world has become more complex. There are issues we don't understand, but just tell us, explain. It's not that hard. I would imagine. There are like hundreds of communication officers. Can they just communicate with us too?
I would encourage you to find the people in your department who are administrators and take them to lunch.
No, I think it shouldn't be those private side deals. It should be a public account in reports, in Excel sheets that are made transparent to the Senate. This should be institutional transparency, not some like, oh, I'm going to see my buddy at the provost office. This is not how it works.
But
I am not demonizing. I'm saying I would like to know more.
Can I just throw something in here? I didn't not hear any demonizing. I thought it was actually remarkably moderate, and I think a brittleness and a defensiveness. with one exception. And it seems defensiveness is a problem. When people exercise power, there should be transparency. And this, since I've devoted the last 10 years of my life to it, is a problem in the federal government. One of the problems is lack of transparency. And we also have to distinguish between executive power, which should be extensive and strong, and administrative power, which is a displacement of representative elected lawmaking to unelected bureaucrats. I'm a bit of an administrator. I run the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and we sue the federal government. We have 30 to 40 cases at a time, and we sue to take down the administrative state because it's exercising unlawful power, and we support broad executive power because that's lawful. And it seems to me we can distinguish between different types of administration in the university level too, but we can talk about that later.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
Okay, quick question. We heard that a modest proposal of making federal funding inversely related to administrative staff levels is a reasonable thing to consider, and we've heard a study or an assertion that funding is directly related to administrative bloat. Is there a objective study that says dollars per student, say, that the less dollars per student or an optimum number of dollars per student gives us the best results in terms of student performance and smallest administrative staff? And if there isn't, should there be?
So I don't think we know what the optimum amount of funding is, and part of it is I don't know how we know how to measure optimal outcome for students, but there's no doubt a very strong relationship between university funding and bureaucracy. So University of Arkansas, where I was the department head for 16 years, has a lot less bureaucracy than Yale. It also has a lot less money, and that's true generally across the board.
On this, I would welcome these kind of studies, and I think they would be done by faculty if we had the data. And I'll just say that, look, over the last 20 years, as I said, Yale went from first place to fifth place. So there's a correlation there. Causation, we don't know, but a correlation with the rise of, the growth of the administration. I would also mention a study by MIT economist Daron Acemoglu. I mean, it's quite, it's a far-fetched comparison, but I think it might be indicative of something. He studied how the rise of an administrative class in companies, so the MBA class, all these people who are trained in MBAs and then are parachuted in companies, take the place of, for example, engineers who should have been promoted but now are replaced by these MBAs, who are supposed to optimize. And they optimize, they reorganize things, they create new jobs. Well, it's totally correlated, in fact, causally related to the loss of profitability of these companies over the long term. And the loss of income for the decrease in wages of employees, because they accrue the differential. And I suspect there's something like that going on in universities as well.
Okay, thank you all for your questions. Let's thank our panelists.
That was fun. Good to meet you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.